Picture the most famous celebrity duo in the world right now. Have you got them in your head? Good. Now multiply their fame, their influence, and the sheer hysteria they cause by about 100. That is exactly what it felt like to witness Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis in the early 1950s. They were not just entertainers, they were an absolute cultural phenomenon. When they walked into a room, the world stopped. When they performed, audiences laughed so hard, they quite literally passed out in the aisles. But what happens when the loudest laughs are hiding the darkest, most bitter resentment imaginable? What happens when two men who are practically brothers realize they can no longer stand the sight of each other? Let's dive into the secret, explosive fight that permanently shattered the greatest comedy partnership in Hollywood history. To really understand the sheer magnitude of this breakup, I want you to imagine the atmosphere of post-war America. People were desperate for joy, and out of nowhere, these two complete opposites collided on stage at the 500 Club in Atlantic City in 1946. Dean Martin was the ultimate anchor. He was dangerously handsome, his voice was velvet, and his cool, unflappable demeanor made every man want to be him. Jerry Lewis was the dynamite. He was the frantic, rubber-faced, unpredictable kid who would interrupt Dean's smooth crooning by dropping plates, tripping over microphone stands, or acting like an absolute maniac. They threw away the script, and the audience absolutely lost their minds. Drop a comment right now if you think spontaneous, unscripted comedy is still the best kind of comedy. Because for Dean and Jerry, that unscripted chaos turned them into millionaires overnight. They signed a massive deal with Paramount Pictures, dominated television, and commanded audiences like rock stars before rock and roll even existed. They were unstoppable, or so everyone thought. But Hollywood has a very specific, very cruel way of finding the tiny cracks in a relationship and driving a massive wedge right through them. As the years went on and the money piled up, the power dynamic began to shift. Think about how you would feel if you and your best friend started a business together, split everything 50-50, but then everyone around you only praised your friend. Critics started calling Jerry the true genius, the mastermind behind the act. They completely dismissed Dean as just a straight man, a handsome prop who stood in the background smoking a cigarette while Jerry did all the heavy lifting. Now put yourself in Dean's shoes for a second. This is a fiercely proud Italian-American from Steubenville, Ohio. He wasn't just a sidekick, he was half the heartbeat of the act. But the real tragedy wasn't what the critics were saying. The real tragedy was that Jerry started to believe them. Jerry was a notorious workaholic who wanted total control over the writing, the directing, the lighting, the production. He was obsessed with the mechanics of filmmaking. Dean, on the other hand, was famously laid back. He wanted to do his job brilliantly, clock out, and hit the golf course. As Jerry's ego inflated and his need for control consumed the partnership, Dean's roles in their movies started shrinking. He felt marginalized, disrespected, and utterly sidelined in his own act. The ultimate unforgivable insult came in 1954. Look magazine, one of the biggest publications in the country, ran a massive cover story on the duo. But when the issue hit the stands, the photo showed Jerry Lewis dead center, and Dean Martin was completely cropped out. All you could see was a sliver of Dean's shoulder. Imagine opening a magazine to see your life's work reduced to a blurry shoulder. For Dean, a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. By the time 1955 rolled around, the atmosphere between the two men was purely toxic. The brothers, who used to share everything, were now communicating exclusively through their agents. The tension on the set of their final films was suffocating, but the actual breaking point, the secret confrontation that severed the tie forever, happened behind closed doors during the making of Hollywood or Bust. Dean had finally reached his absolute limit with Jerry's dictatorial attitude and the constant disrespect. In a blistering, explosive argument in their dressing room, Dean looked straight into the eyes of the man he had conquered the world with, and he delivered a line so cold, so cutting, that it froze their relationship for the next 2 decades. Dean looked at Jerry and said, "To me, you're nothing but a fucking dollar sign." Let that sink in. 10 years of history, millions of laughs, and a bond that seemed unbreakable, wiped out with a single sentence. That was it. The magic was dead. But here is the agonizing part. They still had a contract. They had to finish out their nightclub tour. Can you imagine the sheer willpower it takes to walk out on stage, pretend to be best friends, execute flawless comedic timing, and then walk past the curtain and completely ignore each other? On July 25, 1956, exactly 10 years to the day after they first teamed up, they performed their final show at the Copacabana in New York. They took their final bow, walked off stage, and ended an era. When the split happened, every insider in Hollywood placed their bets. They all thought Jerry would go on to be a massive solo star, and Dean would quietly fade into obscurity without the comedic genius to carry him. They were dead wrong. The people who doubted Dean Martin fundamentally misunderstood his character. They didn't realize they were dealing with a man possessed of an ironclad sense of self and an unwavering moral compass, someone who operated entirely on his own terms. This was a man who would later go on to stand toe-to-toe with the Chicago mob, refusing to be intimidated. This was a man who, when the entire Rat Pack was bowing to political pressure, would flat-out refuse to perform for John F. Kennedy out of sheer loyalty and personal principle. When you understand the depth of Dean's independence and his refusal to compromise his own morals for anyone, not for the mob, not for a president, and certainly not for Frank Sinatra, it makes perfect sense why he couldn't survive being treated as a secondary player by Jerry Lewis. Dean soared on his own. He conquered the music charts, knocking the Beatles off the #1 spot with Everybody Loves Somebody, starred in classic films like Rio Bravo, and became the undisputed king of television. Jerry, of course, also achieved astronomical success as a solo filmmaker and the face of the MDA telethon. They both had the world at their feet, but for 20 long, stubborn years, the silence between them was deafening. No calls, no letters, nothing. They were too proud and too hurt to make the first move. It took 20 years and a surprise ambush orchestrated by Frank Sinatra on live television during the 1976 MDA telethon to finally break the ice. When Dean walked out onto that stage, Jerry's face went completely blank with shock. They embraced, and the 20-year Cold War ended in an instant, proving that some bonds, no matter how badly they are broken, can never be completely erased. Now, I want to turn this over to you. Put yourself in that dressing room in 1956. Do you think Dean Martin was completely justified in walking away to reclaim his dignity? Or do you think they should have tried to save the greatest comedy partnership of all time? Let me know your exact thoughts down in the comments below. And if you love deep dives into the hidden history, dark secrets, and legendary stories of classic Hollywood, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss our next video. After that legendary 1976 reunion, the world held its breath, wondering if the Golden Boys would finally tour again. But Dean Martin was a man of quiet, ironclad principles. He had found his own peace and felt no need to chase the ghosts of 1946. While they stayed in touch, the secret fight had left a scar that transformed their brotherhood into a respectful, distant friendship. The true depth of their bond wasn't revealed on a stage, but in the shadows of tragedy. In 1987, when Dean's son, Dean Paul Martin, was killed in a heartbreaking plane crash, Dean spiraled into a deep, inconsolable grief. He retreated from the world, his trademark cool finally shattered by loss. During the funeral, among the sea of mourners, one man stood quietly in the back, avoiding the cameras and the press. It was Jerry Lewis. He didn't come for a headline, he came for the partner who had once been his entire world. That moment proved that while the $ comment had ended the act, it couldn't kill the love. They were two sides of the same coin, the singer and the clown, who defined an era of American entertainment that will never be replicated. But what do you think? Was the 20-year silence a waste of time, or was it necessary for them to become the legends they are today? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and if you want more deep dives into the untold stories of Hollywood's elite, make sure to hit that subscribe button.